The cliffs of Dunmore Bay Island were treacherous, jagged teeth jutting into the roiling Atlantic, their edges worn by centuries of wind, salt, and wave. In the year 1839, a storm raged with an intensity that seemed unnatural, as if the sea itself were angry at the land for daring to exist. The villagers of Kilbride huddled in their cottages, peering through shuttered windows at the tempest, speaking in hushed tones of vanished fishermen, lost ships, and the cruel temperament of the ocean that had claimed so many lives. It was in this setting that the first letters appeared. Washed ashore, carried by waves that lashed violently against the cliffs, envelopes of weathered parchment arrived, soaked through with seawater and yet perfectly legible. Each bore no address, no sender, only a name written in an elegant, almost spectral script. Those who received the letters felt an immediate chill, as though a hand had passed lightly across the spine, raising the hairs of the neck. And every word within seemed to speak directly to the soul. Mary O'Sullivan, a young woman of the village whose father had been lost at sea years before, was the first to open one. The envelope had floated onto the sand outside her cottage door, its edges frayed, corners softened by salt. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside the letter read simply, "Do not look to the cliffs. Do not answer the waves, but know that I see you always." She read it twice, thrice, and each repetition caused a shiver deeper than the last. Her father had disappeared, swallowed by a storm like the one now thrashing the coast. The words seemed impossibly precise, as if they knew the private fear she had harbored for years, the fear that her father had not truly left, that the sea had claimed him but had not released him, that something lingered just beyond perception. Over the following days, more letters appeared, addressed to various villagers, each containing phrases that echoed the deepest unspoken anxieties of the recipients. One letter spoke to a widow of her late husband's final thoughts. Another warned a young boy to avoid the rocks where his brother had fallen. No one knew who wrote them, and none could explain how letters arrived at their doorstep without trace of passage across land or sea. Mary, drawn inexorably to the shore, began to collect them. Each letter carried a signature that was not a name but a mark, an intricate swirl like the curling of waves frozen on parchment. The villagers began to whisper that the letters were a curse, that the sea itself was speaking through them, or worse, that some ancient, malevolent intelligence had risen from the depths to claim the living with ink and paper rather than fire and water. One evening, as dusk fell, Mary walked the cliffs alone, letters clutched to her chest, wind tearing at her hair, salt stinging her skin. The waves pounded below, furious and unrelenting. A fog rolled in, thick and choking, swallowing the edges of the cliffs and leaving only the roar of the sea. She could hear whispers now, faint but insistent, blending with the hiss of the wind and the crash of the surf. "Do not look to the cliffs," the phrase repeated in her mind, echoing from the letters, yet she could not resist. Step by step she approached the edge, peering over jagged rock into the dark, churning waters below. And then she saw it, a figure, pale, standing upon the foam, impossibly still, staring back at her. Its eyes glowed with a faint phosphorescence, reflecting the fury of the storm. It raised a hand, beckoning, yet the waves tore at it, pulling it down only to rise again. Mary staggered back, heart hammering, unable to tear her gaze away. The next morning the villagers found letters strewn across the beach, some embedded in sand, some tangled in seaweed. They were addressed to Mary, yet she was nowhere to be found. Her cottage was empty, belongings untouched, doors swinging in the stormy wind. And yet, in the distance, among the waves, the swirl of marks that signed each letter seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat emanating from the sea itself. Fear rippled through Kilbride. Families barricaded doors, priests walked the shoreline, whispering prayers against whatever force had risen from the depths. But letters continued to wash ashore, each more precise, more intimate, more haunting than the last. The villagers realized slowly, with growing dread, that the sea no longer obeyed its natural laws. It had begun to write, and what it wrote was alive. Mary, meanwhile, wandered the cliffs, following the whispers, reading each letter as if the ink contained the key to understanding. She felt herself slipping from the world of the living into the rhythm of the waves, carried by tides that seemed to pulse with consciousness. The letters spoke of time that did not flow in linear fashion, of memories that were both hers and yet ancient, of a presence beneath the waves that knew all secrets, All fear, all longing, and when night fell, the villagers of Kilbride claimed that the cliffs glowed faintly with spectral light, and the roar of the Atlantic carried a new sound, the scratching of quills upon paper, unseen hands writing messages that no mortal could intercept. The letters from the sea had begun, and none could stop them. The days following Mary O'Sullivan's disappearance were marked by an uneasy silence over Kilbride. Villagers whispered of her wandering along the cliffs at night, yet no one dared follow. Every dawn revealed more letters, more precise, more haunting than before. Some were addressed to people long dead, yet written in ink so dark it seemed freshly drawn, the paper damp as if soaked in the sea itself. Mary, guided by some unseen force, had begun walking along the coastline, collecting the letters as if they were a map. Each one drew her closer to the cliff's edge, closer to the mysterious figure glimpsed in the storm, and closer to the secret that the Atlantic had kept hidden for centuries. The letters began to speak not just to her mind, but to her soul, revealing truths she could not have known. Her father's final moments, the hidden sins of the village, secrets buried beneath the cliffs for generations. One evening, as fog rolled in thick and suffocating, Mary reached a cove she had never seen before. The waves crashed against rocks with such force that the spray drenched her. Yet in the midst of the tempest, she noticed something impossible. The figure from the letters, pale and luminous, standing atop the water itself. Its gaze held her unblinking, commanding yet sorrowful, a reflection of both longing and warning. "Why do you write?" Mary whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the Atlantic. The waves parted slightly, and in the spaces between, words formed on the surface of the water itself, as if the sea had become a living page. "To remember, to warn, to bind," Mary shivered. The figure raised a hand, and more letters floated from the waves, carried by currents she could not see. Each letter seemed alive, curling in the wind, whispering as it landed. She reached for one, and the words inside mirrored her thoughts, her fears, her memories. It was no longer a message, but a reflection of her own consciousness, shaped by some force older and more aware than any human mind. Back in Kilbride, the villagers noticed the change. Those who had received letters began acting strangely. Some spoke only to the sea, some wandered the cliffs at night, lost in reverie, and a few vanished entirely, leaving letters addressed to themselves pinned to their doors. Fear and fascination warred within the community. Prayers failed, exorcisms failed, and the letters continued, growing more urgent, more precise, more alive. Mary's obsession deepened. She began to follow patterns in the letters, noticing repetitions in phrasing, symbols at the bottom, subtle alterations in ink and texture. The letters were forming a sequence, a code, a map, but to what end she did not yet understand. She wandered farther along the cliffs, past dangerous rocks, past wrecked ships, past signs of the sea's fury. And then, in a hidden alcove beneath a jagged overhang, she discovered something that froze her blood. A chest, soaked by centuries of salt water, inscribed with the same swirling marks that signed every letter. Inside the chest were more letters, countless in number, stacked and bundled, some brittle with age, some fresh and still damp. And at the very top, a letter addressed to Mary herself, written in her father's hand, yet he had been lost to the sea years ago. She trembled as she opened it, the words forming like ink on water. "I am here. I have never left. The sea remembers, and so must you. Follow the letters, endure the tide, and you may understand the truth of our existence." The revelation was horrifying and beautiful. Mary understood that the letters were not merely messages. They were a living record of the sea, of the lives it claimed, of the secrets it preserved. Each recipient, each letter was part of a ritual, a communion between land life and the unyielding consciousness beneath the waves. The sea was alive, aware, and it had chosen her to bear witness, to understand, to endure. That night, the villagers of Kilbride reported the cliffs glowing faintly under the moon, the ocean writhing with phosphorescent light. Letters appeared on every doorstep, some fluttering from rooftops, others embedded in sand as if the sea itself were writing across the land. Mary stood at the edge of the cliffs, surrounded by waves and letters, and felt herself pulled into the rhythm of the ocean. She became part of the correspondence, the cycle, the living memory of the sea. And yet, as the storm subsided and the dawn approached, she realized something terrifying. The letters would never stop. The sea would never rest, and she herself would never be free from the pull. To witness, to endure, to read and understand, that was her fate. Bound to the Atlantic and the messages it sent forth, her sentinel between the living and the abyss, the storm had passed, leaving the cliffs of Dunmore Bay bathed in pale morning light, yet the air remained charged with an unnatural tension. Letters littered the sand, caught in the cracks between rocks, and Mary O'Sullivan stood at the edge, reading and rereading the words as if they contained the essence of the world itself. The letters had become more urgent, more precise, detailing events that had not yet occurred, recounting moments lost to time, predicting actions the villagers would take. Mary realized with growing dread that she had become part of the sea's intelligence, her vessel through which it spoke to the land and the people. Every letter she read, every message she held, bound her further into the rhythm of the tides, the cycles of storms, and the memory of countless lives swallowed by the Atlantic. The figure she had seen during the first storm, pale, glowing, unyielding, now appeared in her mind at will. Guiding, instructing, warning, the villagers of Kilbride began to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding. Some fled, abandoning homes and hearths, leaving doors ajar, windows unshuttered, terrified of being called by the sea itself. Others attempted to destroy the letters, burn them, or cast them back into the waves, yet each effort was in vain. The letters returned, more numerous and urgent, carrying ink that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, messages that could not be ignored. Mary's father appeared again, not as the man she remembered, but as a spectral presence, bound to the sea and its letters. "Mary," he whispered through the waves, "do not fear. The letters are alive and they demand witness. Endure, and you will see the truth of the ocean's memory." Compelled, she followed the cliff path, letters clutched tightly, deeper into hidden coves and jagged recesses where the Atlantic's roar echoed like a cathedral. There she discovered a cavern, carved not by human hands but by the relentless patience of centuries of tides. Within, the walls were inscribed with the same swirling marks that signed every letter. Pulsing faintly with an inner light, Mary realized the cavern was the heart of the sea's correspondence, the central archive of all messages, all lives, all secrets preserved beneath the waves. She placed a trembling hand upon the wall and felt a surge of knowledge, memories of those lost to the ocean, the pain of shipwrecks, the fear and hope of countless souls. The letters were not mere paper. They were vessels of consciousness, fragments of an awareness older than Kilbride itself. Suddenly, the water within the cavern began to rise, glowing faintly. Letters floated freely, forming currents that twisted like living streams. The figure of her father appeared in the center, holding out a hand formed of waves and light. "To understand," he whispered, "you must become part of the flow. To witness, you must endure." Mary stepped forward, feeling herself pulled into the tide. The letters swirled around her, voices whispering in countless tongues, speaking of lives and deaths, of secrets and betrayals, of hopes and fears. She understood then the true nature of the letters from the sea. They were not simply messages, but a living record, an eternal memory of the ocean, binding all who listened into its consciousness. Back in Kilbride, the villagers noticed the change. The cliffs glowed faintly even at night, and the surf carried a whispering hum, melodic yet terrifying, echoing across homes and fields. Those who approached the shore felt the weight of centuries pressing against them, a sense of being watched, recorded, and judged by the sea itself. Letters appeared on doorsteps, in windowsills, to even caught in the branches of trees, their ink shimmering with an impossible light. Mary, now fully enmeshed in the flow of the letters, became the bridge between land and sea. She could read the past, sense the present, and glimpse the unfolding future. She felt the pulse of the ocean, the rhythm of tides, and the consciousness within every wave. The letters from the sea had chosen her as their witness, their conduit, and she endured, knowing that to resist would mean obliteration. And so the cycle continued. Letters arrived daily, nightly, carried by wind and wave, speaking truth, secrets, and warnings. Mary remained among them, unblinking, unwavering, a sentinel to the eternal memory of the sea. The villagers of Kilbride came to understand that the ocean was alive, aware, and infinitely patient, and that to witness it, to endure its letters, was to confront eternity itself. Even today, travelers along the cliffs of Dunmore Bay speak of letters that appear after storms, of strange lights beneath the waves, and of a young woman standing at the edge, reading and watching, her eyes reflecting the infinite knowledge of the Atlantic. She is the guardian, the witness, the enduring presence that links the living to the consciousness of the sea. The letters from the sea continue, timeless, eternal, and unrelenting, a reminder that some forces, some memories, and some truths cannot be ignored and must always be observed.